Fantastic. It's 12:05. I think a good time to start. The majority of the attendees are in the room with us. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. One more sleep till Friday. I'm sure that we're all looking forward to the weekend. In the room with me, I have my colleague Dolly, who is our quality assurance manager, and she's going to be covering the technical aspects associated with a CETA to QCTO transition. And just some housekeeping. Everybody's been entered into the meeting with their videos off and on mute. And when we do Q&A at the end of my session and then again at the end of Dolly's session, you can either unmute or you can post your messages in the chat box. We have had a look at some of the questions that were sent through on registration. Thank you very much for those. I believe that a lot of those are actually going to be answered during the course of our session today, but those questions that are not sufficiently answered or we need to elaborate on, please do bring those to our attention so that we can cover those too. We want today to be an incredibly informative session for you. We want to add value and we want to fulfill our mission, which is to empower people to empower others. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to just present my presentation to you. All right, Dolly, can you see that?
Yes, Elena can.
Okay, fantastic. If anybody has a slow network connectivity on their side, it might take a minute to load. Just to introduce you to our guest speakers today, it's myself, Elaine. I'm the General Manager at iLearn, and I'm also the Certification Chairperson for the ASDSA, which I've been a member for the last 15 years, and looking forward to adding value to you today. Dolly will give you her introduction when she speaks. Right, so I'm going to just touch on the iLearn DNA. We're going to have a look at who the skills development role players are. We're going to have a look at where the QCTO sits on the NQF band. I know that that was also one of the questions that were raised. A brief on the program transition from CETA to QCTO. We're going to have a look at some of the categories, the sector-specific qualifications that have been extended, the learnerships, and then also what currently sits in the form of a learnership with a QCTO, and that's going to really give us a good idea as to which sectors the QPs, which are the CETAs, have been really active in developing curriculum. There definitely is a silver lining, and we're going to touch on that. We're going to share some quick links with you and then go into Q&A. Right, I mentioned this earlier. iLearn was born out of a purpose to empower people in order to empower others. And this is our DNA, our values, which are exceptional, people-centric, passionate, and authentic. We'll share this presentation with you so that you'll also have an opportunity to go through these slides in a little bit more detail. Okay, let's have a look at who the skills development role players are. Contrary to some of the rumors that were out there, SAQA is not going anywhere. It remains the overarching body with regards to our qualifications. We've got the qualifications framework under which the qualifications are developed. We've got the Department of Higher Education, and that's where the QCTO sits over there on the left-hand side. Alongside the Council for Higher Education and Umalusi. So really PSET focused, so post-schooling education and training. On the orange band, if you have a look at the orange band over here, from NQF level 1 right through to NQF level 8, this is where the occupational qualifications sit with a QCTO, and this is the outer band over here. Right. Just to give you an indication of how that compares to where the Council on Higher Education sits, which is NQF 5 to 10, and then Umalusi, NQF level 1 to 4. If we're going to have a look at the transition, this has been in the making for the last 5 years, but we know that the QCTO to date still lacks capacity. And as a result, they've involved the SETAs to do the accreditation site visits, to develop the material, etc. So the QCTO and SETA are holding hands very, very closely throughout this entire process. One cannot be effective without the other. Currently, there are roughly 800 approved full and part-time qualifications. There are thousands still waiting a review and approval. Everything that I'm sharing with you in this slide, Dolly's going to go into more detail from a technical perspective and share with you also where you can find that. The SETA programs are focused on occupational qualifications as well as generic skills versus the QCTO programs, which are purely focused on occupational certification. And therein lies the silver lining I'll unpack for you just now. The QCTO does have very, very few shorter programs, what we know to be skills programs, and some of them are referred to as part qualifications also. The credit value for those shorter programs or the skills programs are still really very high, and there's a lot that are still in development. I know that there was a very big outcry at the offset of this entire process with regards to the legislated credit-bearing programs that need to be delivered, like the occupational health and safety programs, your first aid, your firefighting. And from what I've seen on the QCTO website, that has been taken care of to a large extent. The QCTO qualifications have a stronger focus on the higher NQF levels, definitely. Previously employed and PWD candidates, they've had a limited choice of qualifications to accommodate their levels or their education levels. So the 60% non-bachelor pass rate that we experienced with the last matriculation results makes learnerships an essential element in closing the tertiary education gap. So if candidates or if students didn't have a diploma pass or a bachelor pass, a learnership is an ideal vehicle of delivery for them to close the gap to access higher education qualifications. The key difference between SETA and the QCTO qualifications for me is the ASA exam. And this is an actual sit-down formal exam, and obviously very, very different to what we're used to with SETA, which is just sort of your assignment-based outcomes. And I want you to also keep in mind that there's a separate cost for this. Whether providers build it into the learnership cost, that's something that you will need to clarify for them. But the ASA exam costs are also going to vary across different assessment centres in South Africa. Just keep in mind that there definitely is a separate cost associated with that. The QCTO has permitted the extension, and this is one of the most recent developments, of 275 qualifications across 17 SETAs. I'll show you a table that details that a little bit more. And then there are 4 SETAs that have received no extension on the legacy qualifications. We still have on the legacy qualifications that no longer exist and have not been extended. We still have until the 30th of June 2027 to teach out on those qualifications. So as much as what we can't enroll learners on those qualifications anymore, we can still exit learners who are currently in that qualification who were registered before June this year. So sector-specific qualifications that were extended, and this is across the board, your qualifications as well as your learnerships. It's all inclusive. If you have a look at number 11, Health and Welfare SETA, as well as number 5, CHEETA, and then P-SETA, and then W&R SETA, they had no qualifications extended at all. So what I did on my end is I had a look at the learnerships, and I'm speaking learnership specific because that's our BEE vehicle. which qualifications were extended with SETA that are registered as a learnership, and which qualifications the QCTO holds in these specific sectors that are registered as learnerships with a Q number. And that's what this looks like. And for me, I think this is a really big eye-opener with regards to which quality partners, which are the SETAs, have put a lot of effort into developing curriculum or material for the qualifications with the QCTO that would ultimately replace the legacy qualifications. Highlighted in orange are the industries for me that are a concern. So Bank SETA has a total of 7 learnerships available. They've got the 7 that were extended. They've got 0 with the QCTO. Cheetah had 0 extended, but they did have 14 qualifications developed with a QCTO. Another area of concern, if you look a little bit further down, in the first table, Health and Welfare SETA only have 3 learnerships available. InSETA has 14, MERS SETA only has 6, so they've got the 4 QCTO learnerships available, and then only 2 of their legacy qualifications were extended. PSETA only has 2 learnerships available, and just in total, there are currently 244 learnerships available. So what this tells me is that the SETAs or the corporates out there, or organizations who say that, for example, they're with MERS SETA, if the extended qualifications from SETA and the QCTO qualifications that are available are not fit for purpose in their organizations, these organizations are going to have to do cross-sectoral training. So they're going to have to reach out to the other SETAs to participate in their qualifications. For example, Services SETA has a really large scope available. They've got 64 learnerships available. So I'm seeing that there's going to be a lot of cross-sectoral learning and development that's going to be happening in the learnership space in the future. Okay, so if we have a look at some of the QCTO requirements versus the SETA requirements, has somebody unmuted? All right, we're all good. All right, great. The QCTO does not require learnership agreements. Previously, with the SETA, we would do the learnership agreements with the SETA where the organization pays their levies to, and then we would enroll the individual against the qualification with the SETA, who is the custodian for that qualification. Now with the QCTO in play, we would have to do an enrollment for the QCTO qualifications with the QCTO, but we still have to do our learnership agreements with a SETA to whom we're paying our levies. And the reason we need to do that is because we need it for evidence for our BBBE verifications, and we also need it as evidence for our SARS Section 12H learnership allowance claims that we do, or benefits. So that's how that process would play itself out. SETA is still responsible for the mandatory and discretionary grant funding, where you still submit your WSPs to, etc. That remains unchanged. And then the cost of the QCTO programs are going to be dependent of the number of credits. Now, a lot of the qualifications, and I've got a little example table that I'll share with you. A lot of the qualifications hold a very high credit value. Now, we all understand the formula for notional hours, which means that the qualifications that have a high credit value are obviously going to have a higher delivery period, more training days required for the transfer of knowledge to take place. And then, like I mentioned previously, there's an additional cost for ASA. Initially, it was around 2,500 Rand, but the more Dolly and I started asking around and getting information together, that amount is dependent on the assessment center and will be anything from between 2.5 and 6.5. And I think it's important that when you're engaging with your training provider, if your training provider is not an accredited assessment center for that specific qualification, they're going to need to outsource the ASA exam. And for you to obviously forecast financially on your side, you're going to need to know what that cost is going to be. The QCTO also has very stringent workplace and mentor approval processes in place. That for me definitely speaks to the silver lining. And then we mentioned that exams are required as opposed to the CETA assignment-based competency process that we used to follow. So what Ireland has had to take into consideration is that not all of our clients are comfortable or can accommodate this massive workplace approval process that is required, especially not in the event where mentors, there's an enforcement for mentors to be appointed, for them to accommodate especially unemployed people or people living with disabilities. So in that event, what we've done when we went through our QCTO accreditation, we already built in our MOUs with our hosting partners who would then are pre-approved by the QCTO, and then our learners would be hosted, obviously trained by iLearn as an accredited partner, and then hosted by these pre-approved hosting partners for learners to obtain their experiential workplace learning, and there would naturally also be mentors built into that component. Okay, if we have a look at BE and SARS, I want to point out, and please, all organizations make a note of this, that if you're wanting to do a learnership, please make sure that your training provider provides you with the necessary Q number. You can go onto the QCTO website to verify this information. This is where I've taken this little screenshot from. It's from the QCTO website. There's a long arrow pointing down where it says learnership registration code. That 32Q number is the learnership registration number against the qualification. Not all of the QCTO qualifications are registered as learnerships. This is being updated all the time, and that's why it's important that you stay in touch with what's happening on the QCTO website, because it's continuously being updated. The QCTO website is really quite good with that. As far as BE is concerned, the QCTO learnerships are recognized as a category D on the learning matrix, which is an occupationally directed, instructional and work-based learning program that requires a formal contract and is formally assessed by an accredited body and requires institution and workplace exposure. The skills programs from the QCTO are recognized as a category E on the BE learning matrix. Then consideration must be given to the number of credits. As I explained earlier, it translates into the notional hours, and therefore the duration or out of office hours for training will be impacted. Now, funnily enough, we're used to a learnership running over a 12-month period, extended maybe into 18 or 24 months every now and then, depending on the number of credits or the operational constraints faced in an organization. You're going to have to understand for yourself that the credit value, irrespective of it being registered as a learnership, the credit value is going to determine the duration of the qualification. So, and we're also used to a qualification being categorized as a qualification having no less than 120 credits. Now, in the case of the example that I provided there, of the first one, the above surface cleaner, this is registered as a learnership, but it only has 46 credits. Previously with the CETAs, a learnership would have to be a full qualification with a minimum of 120 credits. With the QCTO, they seem to have taken a different approach. There's the last line in that table is apparel and related machine mechanic. It's on an NQF level 4, also a learnership. But it has 576 credits. So translating that into notional hours, if the individual is going to also still need to do their workplace experience, 30% of that of the notional hours of the 576 credits is going to be classroom based, and realistically, that would be delivered over a 3-year period. These are all little questions that you need to be asking your training providers, and notes that you need to be making on your side. Well, what is the duration, etc. Specifically for BE absorption purposes, if there's a requirement for those additional 5 points to be obtained, then that last qualification that I just mentioned is not going to be ideal, because to exit any individuals in a 12-month period on that qualification is just not going to be realistic at all. Okay, I want to touch on the silver lining. So the learnership trend over the last 10 years, so one individual would participate in 5 to 10 different learnerships in their lifetime, offering no clear profession or direction. So sometimes they would do a production technology NQF level 3, then a business admin NQF level 4, then a contact center NQF level 2, and that I just think is quite directionless, and I think to a large degree, we made a rod for our own backs, because these individuals were just hopping from one learnership to another. I think also for me, one of the highlights of the QCTO is the fact that once the legacy qualifications are completely phased out and all qualifications are enrolled learners are purely enrolled with the QCTO, we're going to have an opportunity to eliminate this professional learnershipping where we've got one candidate on 3 or 4 learnerships, collecting 3 or 4 different stipends, from different organizations. So that is going to be completely eliminated, because currently to vet a candidate, we have to go and check on the LMISs for 21 CETAs to make sure that they're not currently registered on any of the on any other learnership. So I think that's going to completely take the pain away for training providers when it comes to that. The workplace experience previously was not monitored to a very large degree by CETA, and has not always been effective and conducive to learning. So we would have somebody doing a business administration NQF4 qualification, only to find, when we do our site visits as a provider, that this individual is in the production line in a factory, not at all being exposed to the concepts that they're being taught in the business admin qualification. So the QCTO supports occupationally directed qualifications, and this is going to make both the employed and unemployed participants more employable. There are clear career pathways with progressive learning pathways, and I think those are discussions that your training provider should be having with you too, to understand what the articulation opportunities are for this individual, either to be absorbed or into the organization permanently and then developed further, or to be put onto another qualification or another NQF level, aligned to that occupation that they did their first year of studying in. Approved workplaces ensure effective learning environments and mentor support. Dolly's going to give more detail on the requirements for the mentors. And then, in my opinion, the qualifications are relevant and they speak to the demands of the current workplace. Our CETA qualifications may be a little bit dated, as much as that they did add value. the QCTO qualifications were developed with industry experts, and as a result are certainly more relevant. And then I love the fact that the 4IR skills are being addressed. So if you have a look at the ICT qualifications that have been released with a QCTO as developed by MICT-SETA, they definitely speak to 4IR considerably more. There was a recent article released by the QCTO CEO, Vijay Naidu, and he shared on how the QCTO sub-framework is helping to qualify a skilled and capable workforce. And there are just two sections that I extracted from that I found to be, number one, exactly what it is that I wanted to hear, because this is our intention as iLearn, but also 2 areas of accountability that we can hold the QCTO to. So the first one was ensuring the development of qualifications that are responsive to labour market demands, so exactly what our organisations need in the current ways of work. And then the OQSF meets the needs of existing and emerging sectors by ensuring that all learners, professionals, workers, unemployed persons, and those classified as need, those are individuals who are not in employment, education and training, are provided with relevant and portable competencies that support lifelong employability, as opposed to just being more marketable as an individual. I love that it speaks to lifelong employability, staying in an occupation, in a specific occupation, even if it's with different organizations over their lifetime. This just gives you an indication of some of the qualifications that iLearn is accredited for with the QCTO. I want to just draw your attention to the 2 last columns over there. There's the credit value, and as you can see, they differ vastly. And then the quality partner. So the QCTO website will also share with you who the quality partner is who developed the curriculum for that qualification. And this has also given providers the opportunity to expand their scope and provide their clients with a wider variety of qualifications that speak to multiple sectors. And over here, this page over here, the first lot of qualifications speaks to some of the beautiful new ICT qualifications, things like artificial intelligence software developer, and then there's cybersecurity analyst, etc. So beautiful qualifications. So I'm going to encourage every single person to take note of these links over here when we send, when we share the presentation. It'll be made downloadable as far as I know. Use these links to do your homework. You can download a lot of the information as a CSV file, and then obviously just format it on your side so that it's more readable in an Excel worksheet. But this will give you all the information that you need. There's also different little links that you can click on that opens up the curriculum documentation for you, information related to the ASA exams. The QCTO website definitely is a world of information for anybody who is not 100% familiar. Right, then I'm going to open up for questions related to the slides that I shared. Dolly is still going to be covering a lot of the technical information. So I think that's going to answer a lot of questions that we had previously. I know there was a really great question around the different materials that were developed and how closely aligned that would be to the actual final ASA exam. We do touch on that, but in the meantime, let's just have a look to see what questions we may have. We've got Claudette, your hand is up. Do you want to unmute and ask a question?
You've spoken a lot about learnerships and skill program on the QCTO. And I might be blonde if I ask, but what about unit standards? Do they still remain with the CETA?
So well, for the current qualifications that were extended, yes, definitely. What Dolly's going to do is unpack beautifully for you what the components are built into a QCTO qualification. So the unit standards are falling away and they're now going to be referred to as modules. Yeah, so that, yeah, unit standards are going to fall away eventually.
Sure, let me wait for her presentation. I might have some more follow-up questions.
Great, fantastic.
Fantastic,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, Claudette. Claire?
Hi. I just wanted to ask on the CETA and the QTCO, with CETA, I see that there are no modules in the QTCO. How would we go about still doing learnerships for the sector?
Okay, so there may not be sector-specific qualifications, but you can do cross-sectoral training. We do actually also have somebody who I know was wanting to attend today who is in the SACETA space. I'm not sure, Duncan, if you are happy to speak to the SACETA sector-specific learnership requirements. I may have put him on the spot. So there would need to be cross-sectoral training if there isn't anything that's available for SACETA specific stakeholders. I encourage you to visit the QCTO website and have a look at the learnerships that are there. Once you've downloaded it as a CSV file, you can filter by the quality partner, so by SACETA.
Okay, and when we do the cross-sectional training, does that still put us in good stead of giving full BE points, or will some fall away because it's not?
No. So it definitely will. I know that there's an element in the BE scorecard that speaks to scarce and critical skills in that specific sector. So that might need to be taken into consideration. And then perhaps so management, for example, is a generic qualification and a scarce and critical skill across multiple sectors. So you're going to have to just try and align it as closely as possible and maybe just chat to your BE consultant to make sure that it would in fact be viewed as a scarce and critical skill in the sector.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Welcome. All right, Spamandla.
My question is, hi, how are you? I'm sorry.
No problem.
I'm good. I guess my question was answered because I wanted to ask about the unit standard. Since you've mentioned that they're falling away to modules now, I think I'm quite good. I'll just wait for another presentation with the next presenter.
Okay, fantastic. Great. Thanks, Pamandla.
Thank you.
Great. Sampiwe.
I would like you to touch on the assessors and the facilitators for this QCTO qualification. Where do they come in? When will they be trained or registered? What's the process there?
Yeah, absolutely. Dolly, do you want to chat to that?
I was actually thinking maybe because I'm seeing some of the questions that are coming up are things that I'm still going to cover on my slides. Maybe we can hold on to the questions, do my presentation, and then we can take all the questions at the end.
I think that's, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good idea because Dolly's presentation is very technical. It does speak to the curriculum. It does speak to the assessors, moderators, who are now called subject matter experts. So I think that's going to be covered in detail. So Dolly, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Let's see quickly. When you can see my slide.
Here we go. Beautiful.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Dolly. I'm the Quality Assurance Manager at iLearn. I'm responsible for all things compliance, which are our accreditations, our verifications, and just in overall our QMS. So what I'm going to be touching base on are mostly questions that have been coming up quite frequently. And hopefully by the end of my presentation, I would have answered all. So the one question that keeps coming up a lot is the difference between historical and occupational qualifications. So when we're talking about historical qualifications, we're referring to the SETA qualifications, which are now known as your legacy qualifications. Those qualifications are strictly unit standard based, and I know Elaine has answered that. The unit standard based, and their focus is more on transferring the knowledge. Whereas with occupational qualifications, we refer to your modules. So the unit standards completely fall away when it comes to occupational qualifications. And these qualifications only cover your knowledge modules, practical modules, and your workplace modules. And the focus on the occupational qualifications is all about transferring the skills. So when we're talking occupational, we're actually talking about the learners being able to do the actual work after having completed the qualification. What is the similarity? So the similarity across both the historical and occupational qualifications will be the ability to apply RPL. We all know that we've got people that have been in the working industry with a high level number of years in the industry without the academic background. I'll make an example with project management. Let's say we've got someone who's been a project manager for years, but does not have the actual qualification. So these occupational qualifications actually allow you to use the experience that you've gathered over the past years and for you to actually get the academic certificate at the end. Another question that keeps on coming up is what's going to happen to the SETAs? Will the QCTO now take over the roles of the SETAs? And the answer is no. The SETAs will still be in place. However, both the QCTO and the quality partners, which are your SETA, will be playing different roles. So I've just given few roles that each sector will be playing. Your QCTO is still responsible for overseeing the design of occupational qualifications, the accreditation process, the implementation of programs, assessments, and certification of these programs. Whereas with your quality partners, which are your SETAs, they're responsible for the development of these qualifications. They're also responsible for developing the external assessments, which is your ASA. They're responsible for developing and publishing exemplars. These are your mock exams. They coordinate and manage external assessments and accreditation of assessment centers as well. So also remember, when you're accredited for a qualification, you are not automatically accredited to be an assessment center. You then need to go and apply. This is to SDPs. You then need to go and apply for accreditation to be an assessment center, and the accreditation is per qualification. What is the difference between the occupational qualification, which is a parent qualification, part qualification, and skills program? So when you go onto your QCTO website, you realize that they refer to these three types of qualifications. Your occupational qualification is your registered national qualification, which is associated with your profession, which results from your workplace learning. And it consists of your knowledge, practical, and workplace components. And in most cases, you realize that the occupational qualification has like high credit value. And then you've got your part qualifications. Your part qualifications are units of learnings taken from the occupational qualification. These are taken from your parent qualifications, and they mostly sit with like a low credit value. And then you've got your skills programs. These are occupational learning programs that are credit bearing, but they are not registered on the AQF. So you will not be able to find them on SAQA. They do not have a SAQA ID number. And so the next question would be, so if we've got an occupational qualification, which we refer to as a parent qualification, and under that parent qualification, there's a part qualification, are we then automatically accredited for the part qualification if we've applied for accreditation for the parent qualification? The answer is no. So if you are accredited for a parent qualification, so I'll use one of the qualifications, for example, quality controller. So quality controller is a parent qualification, and a part qualification for that qualification is quality inspector. So if you're accredited for quality controller, you're not automatically accredited for quality inspector because the modules from the quality inspector are taken from quality controller. So you are then required to apply for accreditation for the part qualification as well. What are the differentiating features? So we've got, which is mostly our integrated summators. So for occupational qualifications and part qualifications, the learners are required to write ASA, your external integrated summative assessment, at the end of the qualification. And with your skills programs, the learners are required to write FISA, which is your final integrated summative assessment. So when we're talking about ASA, so as a training provider, you can train the learners internally and they can be deemed competent for all the modules, which your knowledge, practicals, and your workplace. But does that then qualify the learner to receive the QCTO certificate? No. So the learners can be deemed competent internally. Once they've been deemed competent internally after your assessments and your moderation, they are still required to go and write that ASA exam. Should the learners not be deemed competent for the ASA exam, then they can't get that qualification. However, they are given a couple of opportunities, 2 or 3, depending on the seaters, to write that exam. And I know for project management, they write 2 papers, and for each paper, the learner needs to obtain 75% and above. So it's very important for us as training providers to make sure that our learners are ready for that ASA. And this is written outside of the training provider. It's monitored by the quality partner. Whereas with the skills program, the FISA is written internally. Learner registration process. So with the learner registration process for both occupational and part qualifications, we've got stage 1A, which is to submit learner enrollment spreadsheets 21 days after the training has started. And I've provided you with an email address there. This is registered as learnerships, as well as those that are not yet registered as learnerships. In a case where your part and your full qualification is registered as a learnership, then there's a part B, which is to submit your workplace agreements to the employer SETA 30 days from the signature date. This only applies to qualifications that are registered as learnerships. Then there's the last stage, which is to submit ASA readiness spreadsheets at least 3 months prior to the anticipated ASA date. Some people will ask, how do we know when the learners will be writing ASA? So you've got your project plan. SDP will put together a project plan, and 3 months prior to them getting to the last module, those learners need to be reported and submitted to the QCTO as ready for ASA. Chances are not all the learners that you have submitted as ready for ASA will write, because only learners that have been deemed competent internally for all modules will qualify to write ASA. Then your skills programs registration, we are required as SDPs to submit implementation plan to the QCTO at least 5 days after the training has commenced. I've also provided you with an email address there. And then the last phase will be to submit learner achievements 21 days after FISA has been conducted. So it's also very important to just make sure that the learners do complete FISA, because if they do not have FISA, they will not be able to get their SORs from the QCTO. So now let's talk about the transition and the latest gazette. What does the transition mean for the skills development providers? The last date of enrollment was the 30th of June 2024. We've got about 374 qualifications that have been extended for at least 1 to 2 years. And with the extension, training providers cannot now apply for new accreditation. If you are not already accredited for those qualifications that have been extended, you can't apply for new accreditation. The extension is only applicable to training providers that already sit with this accreditation. So with all the learners that have been enrolled by the 30th of June, this is now for qualifications that have not been extended, training providers need to make sure that all these learners have been exited out the system by the 30th of June 2027. The latest gazette mentioned there were a lot of numbers running around and were being mentioned on the gazette. So what I decided to do was to just break down the numbers and only speak to the numbers that affect us as training providers. So we have 1,475 qualifications that have reached their registration end date, and this was already on the 30th of June 2023. From the 1,475 qualifications, there's 374 qualifications that have been extended. And again, I'll just share a list of which SETAs have extended those qualifications. And there's 1,101 qualifications that have been deregistered. What are the reasons for the deregistration, which is one question that keeps coming up? So one of the reasons is that some of these qualifications have already been re-registered as either occupational qualifications, PARD qualifications, or approved QCTO skills programs. Some of these qualifications that have been deregistered are no longer active, like they've been on the system, but no learners were enrolled onto these qualifications. And some of these qualifications are no longer relevant to the industry. So we train learners, but learners are struggling to find employment even with those qualifications. And in some cases, the SETAs did submit approval for some of these occupational qualifications, but however, they did not provide sufficient evidence to actually give proper motivation for these qualifications to be extended. Let's look at the number of qualifications that have been extended. So there's a total number of 374 qualifications that have been extended, and these are extended by either a minimum of 1 or 2 years maximum. I know the MICT qualifications that have been extended have actually been extended up until the 30th of June 2026, so that's 2 years. Services SETA speaks to 1 year with a hope of extending for another year. And the reason for extensions are these qualifications that have been extended, they are either linked to regulatory qualifications, some are currently being realigned, evaluated, or have been submitted to SAQA for re-registration process. And some of these qualifications are linked to your NATED qualifications, your N4s to N6. And the big question is, what's going to happen to the unit standards now that we've got all these qualifications that have been extended? Does that automatically mean that the unit standards have been extended? So my recommendation would be, please do consult your SETAs, because there's different information going around regarding the extension of the actual unit standards. You've got some SETAs that are saying, no, they will not be extended. And then you've got some SETAs that have actually confirmed, I know with Services SETA and MIC, they've actually confirmed in writing, well, I've got that email in writing that we can run with it. But for your specific SETA, it's very safe for you to please go to your SETA and get it in writing. I would highly recommend that. You also realize that when you go onto your SAQA website for the qualifications that have been extended, the last registration date or enrollment date has not been extended. I think SAQA is still updating. There's been a couple of qualifications that have been extended this morning, including the occupational qualifications that have expired already, like your project manager, your contact center. So please make the QCTO and the SAQA website your best friend. This is specifically to the training providers. So we've got, I mentioned that there's 374 qualifications that have been extended, but not all these qualifications fall under the SETAs. So for the SETAs, there's only 275 qualifications that have been extended due to the reasons that I've mentioned, which is either realignment, development, evaluation, or recommended to SAQA for re-registration, and the SETAs are still waiting for SAQA to then advise. And then from the 374 qualifications, 97 of those are NATED qualifications, your N4 to N6, and 2 of those are finance qualifications, and this was a special request by the Minister of Finance. How many qualifications are currently available on the QCTO website, including full qualifications, part qualifications, and your occupational qualifications. So currently the QCTO website has listed 787 part and full qualifications available. From the 787 qualifications, there's 214 qualifications that have been registered as learnerships. In Elaine's presentation, she mentioned that not all the qualifications are registered as learnerships. So it's very important, more especially to the employers, when they want an STP to train for them, it's very important to obtain that Q number, because all qualifications that have been registered as a learnership will have the Q number. And then there's 125 skills program on the QCTO, and we don't really have a big option there. And I'm hoping, they're gonna give us more skills programs to play around. And how many qualifications? There's still qualifications that are recommended to SAQA for re-registration. However, when you go onto the QCTO website, they do not give a list of these qualifications, but they have provided an email address, which I've indicated on my slide. So if you're interested in knowing how many qualifications have been recommended to SAQA for re-registration, please feel free to send an email to that email address. This is more especially to the employers and training providers with qualifications that have not been extended. So I'm hoping for those SETAs that have not given us a lot of extensions, there's a lot of qualifications that have been recommended there for re-registration. There are other qualifications that are also out that have been developed and evaluated, but they're out for public comment. The QCTO, someone is on the camp. I've also noted that the QCTO has not listed which qualifications these are, but again, you're more than welcome to send an email to the public comments email address that I've given there, just to find out what qualifications are there, what qualifications are still coming up, so that you can also plan ahead. So let's talk numbers. So a number of extended qualifications. We've got on my left, I've got the SETAs that did not really give much extensions. Cheetah sitting on 0, no extensions was given there for legacy qualifications. Bank SETA SIG only extended 7 qualifications. Food BAF 5, FPNM 3, HW did not do any extensions. In SETA, 6 qualifications were extended. MERSETA only 2, and MERSETA has a lot of legacy qualifications, so that also caught me by surprise. We've got MQNA with 6 qualifications that have been extended. PSETA 0, no extensions. TETA 4, WNR, which also caught me off guard there, 0, because most of the qualifications, I know most training providers are credited with WNR. And then on my right, I've got SETAs that really did their best in extending these legacy qualifications. You've got your Agri-SETA 19, LG-SETA 22, CAT-SETA 45, which is a brilliant number there. We've got your Construction-SETA 19, ETDP 12, EWC 21, FACET 14, MIG-SETA 30, very good number there as well. SAS-SETA 16, and Services-SETA 44, which I was quite impressed with, because I know most employers and training providers were really crossing fingers on the business administration qualifications. Yeah. So what does the transition mean for our employers? So employers will have to apply for workplace approvals through the SETAs, which are quality partners, to host learners. It is highly recommended that the SDPs actually facilitate the process for the employers. Because remember, when the employers are giving us learners, they're saying, here, we are trusting you with our learners. We are trusting you with our processes. We are trusting you to actually guide us. So I wouldn't recommend that the SDPs just say to the employers, okay, look, here's the process. Please run with it. Let's please hold our employers' hands and help them with the process up until the end. The employers are also required to have workplace mentors. This is compulsory. I know previously, like with the SETA qualifications, the learners would get away with not having mentors there. This is a requirement. And when the SETAs come through for site visits to do workplace approval, they will require mentor documents. So I just gave an example using one of the qualifications that we are accredited for, a STO person. What are the physical requirements that the quality partners would look for when they're coming to do the workplace approval? So physical requirements will be, in this case, store person. I've listed your operational retail store, stock moving equipments, organizational, protective clothing, and so I've listed all those requirements. And where do you get these requirements? How do you know what's required as an employer? Again, it is the SDP's responsibility to make that curriculum document available to the employer. All this information you will find in the curriculum document. The curriculum document will give you a list of all the requirements, physical, human, and compliance requirements across all modules, knowledge, practical, and workplace. Let's talk about the human human resource requirements here, mental in the workplace. So in this particular qualification, the mentor is required to either be a supervisor or a manager with at least 1 year experience of stock storage processes and procedures. The SETAs, including us as SDPs, we will then need the mentor CV and any W&R qualifications or certificates that they might have. Of course, this differs from one qualification to another. What does the transition mean for our SMEs? And I know this question came up earlier on. So when we're talking about SMEs, your subject matter experts, we're referring, there's 2 types of SMEs in this particular matter. You've got your facilitators, assessors, and moderators. And you also have your OQSF SME. The OQSF SME is a QCITO ambassador or QCITO representative. So what they're responsible for is the realignment of qualifications, assisting the QCITO with their accreditations, and so on. And one would ask, how do I then become an OQSF SME? So there is a link on the QCITO under the Join Us tab, and when there's a vacancy open, and then it will allow you to then apply to be an OQSF SME. But I know currently that link has not been up. Now let's talk about our current facilitators, assessors, and moderators. So the QCITO places more emphasis on facilitators more than it talks about your assessors and your moderators. And the requirement for you to actually be an SME, you are required to have industry-related experience. So if you are going to be training learners on project manager level 5, you are required to have project management industry experience, at least 3 to 5 years experience. You're also required to have a qualification that is related to the qualification that you will be training, at least a level higher than the one that you'll be training. Again, I'll use project manager level 5. So if you're going to be training learners that are doing project manager level 5, you are at least required to have project management level 6 qualification. Having an assessor, facilitator, and moderator unit standards is also an advantage. Question will be, do we then register to be an SME? So there are SETAs that have requested for SMEs to be registered, like Service SETA. I've provided an email address there in terms of how you will then register to be an SME. I've also been in contact with MICT trying to find out what's the process. They did confirm that yes, the SMEs will need to be registered. However, there's no process being implemented currently. So communication will go out to the STPs and the SMEs in terms of how they will need to register. So I highly recommend that our SMEs keep in touch with their SETAs. Find out, go to the SETA that you are currently registered for, the SETA that you have scope for currently for the legacy qualifications, and find out if you are then required to be registered as an SME, because the QCTO only makes mention to the facilitators. So what we will do internally is whoever we then use as a facilitator and this person meets the requirements as per the curriculum document, we will then use the same person as the assessor. And then in terms of looking at the moderator, and remember, if we're going to be using you as an assessor, despite you having all the industry experience and the qualification that speaks to the one that you'll be training, you are still required to have experience in assessments. Same goes for the moderator. We will follow the same process. And the SMEs will then wonder, how do we know whether or not we meet these requirements? Again, make QCTO website your best friend. All this information is on your curriculum document. So when you go onto your QCTO website under the qualifications registered, there are documents that are linked to these qualifications, and they will give you all the requirements so that you can be able, when you are applying to be an SME with your SETA, you already know whether or not you meet the requirements. What does the transition mean for our learners? So our learners will be required to write an ASA, like I mentioned earlier on, of occupational and part qualifications in order for them to obtain their certificates. Learners, again, only learners that have been deemed competent internally across all modules will qualify to write an ASA. If a learner is NYC, even for one module, that learner will need to continue remediating until they are deemed competent before we can actually put that learner out for ASA. Learners are also required to write FISA for skills programs in order to obtain the QCTO SORs. So you can train your learners on your module and your practical modules, your knowledge in your practical modules. But if the learners do not write FISA at the end, they will not be able to get the QCTO SOR. So with all the training material that's going around, and there are SETAs that have actually made training material available, but also there are SETAs that have not made the training material available. So for those of us that are actually buying the material from the SETAs, from this developers, how do we then make sure that our learners are ready for ASA? So the one important thing is to make sure that when you buy your material, you take your curriculum document, that all your internal assessment criteria are covered as per the curriculum document. So these will either be covered in your formatives or in your summatives or both. But please make sure that there is no IAC that's left out. Go according to the curriculum exactly. Another thing that you can make sure of is ensuring that the material covers all the associated assessment criteria, and these are indicated in your external assessment specification document. Again, where do we get these documents? They are available on the QCTO website, curriculum document, both available on the QCTO website. So as a training provider, when you get the material, please don't just sit with the material and assume that everything is covered. You need to make sure that all the modules are covered, all the AICs are covered, all the AACs are also covered. And last but not least, SETAs have made available exemplars. So when your learners have been deemed competent for all the modules that they've covered internally, I highly recommend that you ensure that your learners write the exemplars, because these exemplars are prepared by and developed by the quality partners. So chances of these exemplars being far-fetched from the actual exams, those are very slim. So please make sure that you prepare your learners as much as you can. Rather overload them with all the information than have them walk into that exam room and not being able to actually answer a single question. Again, I provided a link there in terms of where you would get certain information. That's your QCTO website, and I've given a tab. So if you want to know or want to get a list of all your registered qualifications, part qualifications, learnerships, and skills programs, please go onto your QCTO website under the qualification tab. It's going to give you a list there. And then there's also a resources tab. This resources tab consists of all your policies, your guidelines, your assessment policies. So if you're an SDP that's planning to apply for accreditation, the resources tab has guidelines in terms of how you then apply for accreditation. How do you update your QMS? Because if you're now applying for accreditation, you need to change your QMS. Your assessment policy needs to change. Your certification policy needs to change. So there's a couple of policies that need to change there. So you need to make sure your RPL policy will also need to be updated. So as an SDP, it's also very important if you're looking at applying for accreditation, make use of the resources tab as well as the occupational qualifications tab. So that will be it from my side, and I'll open up to questions. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Dolly. So we do have a lot of questions. I don't think that everybody who asked the questions are still here. All right, just going to put that over there. All right, so is Ireland an accredited assessment centre? Yes, absolutely we are, and you can reach out directly to us to better understand what our assessment centre use costs are. We are also currently an accredited assessment centre only for some qualifications, and continuously applying for new accreditation assessment centre qualifications. Okay, I'm just going up here. And then Dolly, to be an accredited assessment centre, does the venue have to be at your premises, or can you use an outsourced venue when you apply for accreditation?
So you can use an outsourced venue when you apply for accreditation. You just need to make sure that the venue that you're using has all the resources that are required to be an assessment centre. Again, when you are applying to be an assessment centre, you will get a list. Depending on the qualification that you're applying for, you will get a list of all the resources required.
Great stuff. And then Sharisa's asked a couple of questions. How do we recognise skills programs going forward? They would still be skills programs, but it also just links back to another question that was asked. Are skills programs credit bearing?
So, hi Elaine, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, they are credit bearing. However, they do not sit on the NQF. So you will not find them on the SAQA website because they do not have a SAQA ID. They strictly sit with the QCTO. They are approved by the QCTO.
Okay, and then how would these be registered or enrolled on the NLRD?
So the only registration that I'm aware of would be the one that needs to go through the QCTO, and I've indicated the process there. And so just making sure that that's done 5 days after the training has commenced, and then again 21 days after the learners have written their FISA. But in terms of the SAQA ID, it's not there. You realize that even when you go onto the QCTO website, when it's talking about skills programs, it will give you an SP and then a number, but you won't find that number on the SAQA website.
Okay, great. So they'll still receive a statement of results?
At the end, yes.
Okay, all right, fantastic. Thank you very much. All right, if the SDP is accredited for a qualification with the QCTO, do they have to apply separately to offer that qualification as a learnership? As far as I know, we don't do that process. It all happens in the background between the Department of Education and QCTO.
So the question not saying if you're already if you've already applied for a qualification, do you need to apply again once it's been registered as a learnership, or do you apply for it to be
Yes.
registered?
Yeah. Do they have to apply separately to offer that qualification as a learnership?
No. So what you can do is once you are accredited for a qualification, if it has not been registered as a learnership as yet, once it's been registered as a learnership, you still registered for that qualification. But if you have applied for a qualification and you're still waiting for it to be registered, that process would then not be between the SDP and the SETA or the QCTO. That process would then be between the QCTO, the SETA, and SAQA. And once they've confirmed their registration on their side, it will then be updated on the QCTO website. Hence, I said, if you're currently sitting with a qualification that's not yet registered, please make the QCTO website your best friend and constantly check whether or not your qualification is now reflecting under qualifications that have been registered as a learnership.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dolly. And then there was Geron just asking with regards to insight on how to approach the practical issues and corporate's general avoidance of wanting to have the capacity to provide learners with workplace experience. Yes, we absolutely find that all the time. You know, there's mandatory BE points that they need to obtain, etc. So we're aware of that. We also are aware of the fact that very often those organizations just don't actually have the capacity or the resources to host the learners. And that is why iLearn's outsourced model is tried and tested, and it works well because as a provider, we understand what the workplace requirement actually is for it to be an effective workplace learning experience for the learner. And that's why, yeah, as a result, the outsourced solution is the best way. Sometimes if we have a cohort of, say, 20 learners, very often the sponsoring company is only able to host maybe 2 or 3 of them, in which case we take the remainder of the cohort then and place them at a host site. Okay, scrolling up here. We previously referred to the SAQA list of recognized qualifications. Will there be a new one released for QCTO recognized qualifications?
So the list that is already, so the list that's for the registered recognized qualifications, that's the list that's currently on the QCTO website. So if there are any changes, then those changes will be updated on the QCTO website. But for now, we work with the list that's currently available on the website.
All right. And then AB asked, how is this learning for delegates and students with RPL and learning disabilities, or how is this going to impact them? Is this not a way to keep the very students who struggled with matric to be further disadvantaged? In my opinion there, it's absolutely critical that when you are identifying a qualification solution for a client, and they have a requirement for unemployed people living with disabilities, that the qualification selected meets the education and ability requirements of the individuals who are going to be ultimately recruited. There has to be an alignment there. Please advise if skill.
So,
sorry, yes.
Yes, it's ABK here.
Yes.
So the reason why I asked this question was there are students that actually struggle to write exams. They've got no problem with physically processing essays, projects as it's being done currently. But when it comes to physical exams, they've got an absolute fear. It's not that they cannot do the job. It's not that they cannot process, but that is the disability. So when I talk about disability, I'm not talking about a mental disability where they cannot actually process, but they just simply can't write exams.
Absolutely, AB. I agree with you 100%. And the ASA exam is definitely going to be something that we're going to have to deal with on a case-by-case basis. I think academic support for that individual is critical, and having academic resources available to support that individual and help them feel confident through throughout that process, not just from the facilitator's perspective, but also internally at the training provider, our learner liaison team, for example, to take all of that into consideration. I hear you, AB. And I do believe that that is something that we're going to have to deal with on a case-by-case basis. All right, there's a question here from Gugu. Please advise if skills programs can be delivered using a hybrid model, classroom and remote learning. I believe that we absolutely can. There's nothing available that's fully online, but yes, you can use virtual interventions.
We've got a hand up. Yes, Mpiwe.
I'm here again. I just want to know this QCTO process. How is it going to deal with the movement of employees? Employee 1 enrolled for this program working for company A. After 6 months in the program, you move to company B. So how then the process is going to deal with that?
I hear you, because Dolly, that learner would be registered for that qualification under that specific organization.
No, remember the learner is registered for the qualification under the training provider. So
okay.
Yes, you are registered. When we submit your registration, you are registered under this training provider. So should you then decide to move to a different employer, that's still not a problem. We just need to make sure that the new employer, if you want to continue with the qualification, the new employer that you are moving to meets the physical requirements for workplace approval. The only difference is if you are a learner or employer and you're moving to a different training provider, then that changes everything. But if you are still sticking to the same training provider, there shouldn't be a problem at all.
But but sorry, the employees, they do not pay for themselves for this type of training. The employers do. So
you as an employee,
when you move to employer B, the employer B does not have a budget to pay for you for that particular training, which we have started it in employer A.
I hear you.
Employer A,
Carry on,
employer A, you actually have options. So you've got options to either terminate this learner because you are paying for this qualification. So you terminate and then you can replace, provided that the replacement time still falls within the replacement policy for that specific provider. So you can terminate and replace, or if it's too late for the learner to replace, we can then wait for the next cohort and you can put in another learner.
Okay, I think I'm worried about the learner, not the employer as such.
Yeah.
Because now this does not favor the employees at all. If this is the case, because I enrolled for this training working for company A, now I had to move to company B. Now I have to lose all that opportunity because company B is not prepared to pay for this training. It doesn't have the equipment and the assessment centers like company A does. So
remember now, simply in that case, it's up to you as a learner to, there's two options even with that as well. If you as a learner want to continue with that qualification, there's two options. You talk to your training providers, and you continue paying for that qualification by yourself, or you speak to your new employer and you mention that this is the opportunity that, is it possible for them to continue paying? But they shouldn't, if you as a learner want to continue, I don't think there should be a need for you to drop out, because there's an option. You can either continue paying for it, or you speak to the new employer and you work around the finances, and also speak to your training provider as well in terms of how can this training provider accommodate this change for you.
Okay, I hear that.
Okay. Must all facilitators, assessors, and moderators register themselves through the QCTO and not the various CETAs to become accredited and gain an accreditation number?
No, so in one of my slides, I actually mentioned that in order for you to be an SME, there's a process. So you need to go to the CETA that you want to have a scope for. So there are CETAs that have that have actually asked these SMEs to register, like your services CETA. There are also CETAs that are still trying to figure out whether or not the SMEs need to be registered. And then again, there's another process to be an SME, which is to be a QCTO SME. That process is completely different to being an assessor and assessor. I think the confusion comes in when we're talking SMEs. People think you need to be registered with the QCTO. If you are with the QCTO, then you are a QCTO representative SME. You are there to do their accreditation, the designing of their qualifications. However, if you're a facilitator, assessor, and moderator, please speak to your CETA that you currently have a scope for. And if you wish to extend, also depending on whether or not you meet the requirements, then please approach that specific CETA or those CETAs that you wish to extend into.
Absolutely. I think that also answers Siphelele's question. He's wanting to know about how stringent the registration process is for the SMEs. You know, he's a graduate, passionate about skills development, wanting to get involved, but may not have the necessary industry experience. I think, again, there, speak to your CETA to understand better what your options are going to be. Okay, if the learners are required to take mock exams, this will mean that they will have to take study leave from their respective companies. Some companies do not offer study leave days. The exam length, for example, qualification also determines the length of leave. That would be built in the mock exams are built into the project plan. So the employer would know in advance all of the days that are required for the individual to be out of the workplace.
Yeah. And the only additional date that we would then bring into the employer's attention would be the ASA exam date once it's been confirmed. But everything else is built into the project plan.
Yeah. Okay, then is the assumption correct that only full qualifications and part qualifications with a SAQA number be registered as learnerships, not skills programs?
No, skills programs can't be learnerships. So the only qualifications that will be registered as learnerships are your full qualifications and your SAQA, like you're correct, the ones with SAQA ID numbers. Skills programs will always remain skills programs, and then we've got your learnerships, which are your either your full or your part qualifications. But even with that, once the qualification has a SAQA number, we can't then assume that it's a registered learnership. It's important for us to then go back to the QCTO website and check whether or not that qualification is registered as a learnership.
The Q number, yeah. Absolutely. And then, is there a way of registering a full qualification as a learnership if it hasn't been done already? I think Dolly spoke to that. That happens in the background, something we don't all have control over. Yes, high anxiety and exam phobia. Can't they apply for transcription, reading, or the usual education? And by the way, high anxiety is recognized as mental health. Yes, absolutely. I hear you, Kate. That's a real thing. I'm one of those people. I'm not an exam person at all. I'm not sure how that's going to be addressed, especially in the light of the fact that it's recognized as a mental health condition with a QCTO. And again, it's going to have to be addressed case by case and with a QCTO. How do we go about to have our qualifications presented as RPL under the QCTO? Is there a process? So, Karina, yes, there absolutely is. The QCTO does have an RPL process, and it is available on their website also. Mosa, during accreditation process, if my company is new, how do I provide audited financial statements that's needed. I think that's going to be a question that you're going to have to engage with the QCTO on directly. It would depend on whether you or your accountant is going to be able to provide that, depending on where the financial statements lie.
Because that's actually a requirement, Yule, because there's 2 phases. Once you get to phase 2, the requirement is for you, amongst all the other documents that you submit, your audited financial statement and your business plan. So I guess in that case, if you don't have an audited financial statement, maybe a letter from your accountant, but do speak to the QCO just to hear what options you have available there.
Okay, right. And if our provider is offering single unit standards, for example, firefighting, they will have to apply to the QCTO. Yes, yeah, they may have been extended, and please check that first and foremost. But if not, you're going to have to refer to the skills programs with the QCTO for the firefighting and first aid, etc. Are there any other qualifications that writes ASA exams besides occupational qualifications and part-time? Yamkela asked that question. I'm not 100% clear on that. It's the QCTO qualifications that have the ASA exams. All right, Tandiwe, Transnet Port Terminals, Durban. Does internal assessments carry any value without undergoing ASA or FISA exams? No. And unfortunately not, because post the qualification, you have to purchase you have to get the exams from the QCTO. And yeah, that's the process. iLearn has undertaken to do internal assessments. It's not a prerequisite, but because from a quality perspective, we want to monitor the full implementation of the qualification throughout, we're going to do continuous assessments.
Yeah, and including moderation as well, just to make sure that all the gaps are closed. So if you're going to only do internal assessments and internal moderation and not let the learners write ASA, that counts as non-accredited. You can provide the learners with your internal certificate, but it's non-accredited, it's not recognized.
Okay. Is there a process of applying to being a subject matter expert for material development?
No.
No, nothing. The QCTO doesn't speak to that. Okay. Can employers register as training providers under QCTO? If so, what are the requirements? So there, my understanding, Dolly, is that there are employers who have chosen to open up their own internal academies, and you would follow exactly the same QCTO training provider process as an external independent. What is the process of applying to being a subject matter expert for material development? I've already touched on that. We are currently accredited with Mercy for skills programs and skill sets. Would our accreditation need to be extended with MERSITA or the QCTO? If the qualifications or the skills programs that you were accredited with previously have been extended, then you can continue, going with that process. You can't ask for a further extension on the legacy qualifications. And I suggest that you start looking now at what MERSITA has available in the skills program space so that you can start following the QCTO process.
And also, Elaine, it's also very important for training providers to note if you are accredited for a SETA qualification, you can't use the same material to run a QCTO qualification. And this is a question that keeps coming up a lot because it's completely different. Remember, we said the skills programs completely fall away. We're now referring to knowledge, practical, and knowledge modules. So you need a complete new set of training material.
Absolutely. Okay. And then Anna asked, will learners log into a platform for ASA? Will we need to have a platform if you applied to be an assessment centre? So as far as I know, the ASA exam is not online.
It differs. It differs from one assessment depending on the qualification that the learners are actually going to be writing. I know in most cases the learners actually come in physically, but we're still trying to see what's going to happen with the IT qualifications. That could be an online, we don't know, but I think also that will need to be treated on case-by-case basis. But for now, I'm very much aware that the learners have been coming in to write physical assessments.
Okay, the physical ASA exams. Okay. And then AB, love your experience, love your qualifications. If what you're sharing there is authentic, then you definitely do qualify as a subject matter expert, and you would be an ideal candidate for facilitation for the qualifications that you do hold, which is supply chain, manufacturing, and project management. Please leave your details with us. We are always in the market for subject matter experts. So far, learnerships, there will still be a POE to complete by learners and then a final exam via QCTO.
Yes.
Okay, so still POE, so still assignment based, and then a final exam.
You still have your formatives, your summatives, your practicals, your logbook. That needs to be assessed and be deemed competent before you can write the final assessment.
Okay, and then Karina's also asking that, saying that she's applied for accreditation with a QCTO and wanting to speed up the process. Karina, if you find the answer to that, please let us know. We have a number of qualifications still awaiting accreditation, site visits, etc. And if I do find a magic wand that can speed up the QCTO process, I will share it with everybody I know. Okay, let me just see if there's some new questions over here. My question, sister learners who have disabilities are provided with mentors and coach as accommodations. Is that part prepared for the assessment of the QCTO? The mentors and the coaches, especially for people living with disabilities, is a huge advantage. It's something that iLearn does internally for our people living with disability candidates, but that's up to every single training provider. The mentors, what are the mentors' minimum qualifications, and does experience supersede qualification?
So with the mentors, you would need to keep on referring back to the curriculum document, depending on the qualification that the learners will be training. So it will give you everything that you need to know. Some qualifications will say 1 year experience for a mentor and a qualification that is related to what the learners are doing. And some qualifications would actually say 2 to 3 years. So it differs depending on the qualification.
Okay, fantastic. And then Anna just asked again, just to confirm, the QCTO provides the assessment, the accredited assessment center with the exam for the qualification.
Okay, so the accredited assessment centers, these are training providers that have applied to be accredited assessment centers. So once you've applied and the learner is ready for ASA, the ASA exams will come from the SETA, which is the quality partner. Whichever SETA developed that qualification will then make those papers available to the training provider. And those papers will then go to the SETAs for assessments. The the assessment center will only be then advised after the learners have written, will only be advised in terms of whether the learners have passed or not. But the development of the ASA solely sits with the quality partner.
Okay, super. Thank you. And I hope that answers your questions. That is it for the questions that have been asked. I hope that I've not missed anything, and I hope that I've covered it in everything. Any hands up for any further questions? Right, nothing. Oh, okay, Simangele.
I'll find out, as an SDP, can you also register as a workplace?
Yes, you can. So yes, you can. So I'll make an example. We are an SDP. We are also, we're an SDP. We've got the ETDP practitioner, a qualification. I've also applied to be a workplace, approved workplace for that a specific qualification. As long as you've got the resources in place, physical resources, human resources, and compliance resources, then you're good to go to actually apply to be a workplace approved center as well.
Okay, thanks. So a follow-up question. So you can actually be all three. You can be the P assessment center and the workplace approved.
Yes, provided again, you've got all
You've
the
met all the
requirements.
requirements. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, super. Just a quick summary, Dolly. Lauren has asked, and I know that we've covered this, the requirements to be a facilitator for a QCTO accredited program.
So the requirement, again, that will be dependent on the qualification that you want. You would need to go on the QCTO website. The curriculum document will indicate what you as an SME are required to have. Again, like some qualifications would say to be an SME, but industry experience is very important. I know that's one important thing. And some qualifications will then go further and add that you are required to have an NQF level, more higher level, of the qualification that you are currently training, and some will give more, but it's very important for SMEs to go to the QCTO website, look at all the qualifications that they're intending to be SMEs for, and go through the curriculum document. And once you then recognize which qualifications you want to be an SME for and you meet the requirements, please go back to the quality partner, which is the CETA that has developed that qualification, and find out from them whether or not you are now then required to be an SME. Some would wonder, how do I know which CETA developed this qualification? So on the QCTO website, it actually gives you a list of the CETAs, and even when you open the curriculum document on top, it shows you which CETA developed that qualification.
Okay, super, thank you. Petlo, you've got a question?
On skills programs that were accredited with CETAs, with this transition, what is going to happen? Because you have also indicated in your presentation in terms of the qualification that are sitting with the QCTO, that they are credit bearing, but they are not NQF aligned and cannot be traced to the level of SACO. So in that process, what is going to happen looking into the credibility of the qualification and the skills development programs? Because I'm raising this from the departmental point of view. As departments train us, when we source providers, one of the things that we need to ascertain ourselves with is to check as to whether the qualification is accredited with CETAs and recognized in line with SACO standards. So with this transition, how is the process going to be guided for that certainty purposes? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petlo.
Okay, so regarding the skills programs, unfortunately, you again need to go back to the CETA where your skills programs are sitting with. I know some CETAs, like I mentioned earlier on, some CETAs have extended the qualifications and have actually given a go-ahead to train this, the unit standards that are part of those qualifications. But in a case where your skills programs, particularly as a training provider, so you say as an employer, so your training provider will need to go back and find out from that CETA what's happening with these skills programs. Is the qualification that falls under, there's a qualification where the skills programs are taken from being extended, or are these skills programs being replaced by other skills programs? Remember, even though they're not sitting on the SACO website, but I know there are skills programs that are directly being transferred into the QCTO skills programs, like your conflict management, your workplace skills program. So very important, go to your CETA, find out from your CETA, or even look at the QCTO website, check if maybe the skills programs that you're referring to have not already been realigned to an occupational qualification. And if it's not there, please communicate directly with your CETA and find out whether or not they form part of the qualifications that have been extended. If yes, find out if you can go ahead and train them as unit standards. If not, find out if that qualification where the skills program is taken from is by any chance under re-registration or redevelopment.
And I hear his concern around the credibility of the skills programs not being on the SACPA website. You know, it's a prerequisite, even with government departments. It's a prerequisite. So I hear your concern, and I'm not sure about the engagement between SACPA and QCTO and how that is going to be resolved as yet. Hey, Yamkela. Hi.
I needed a clarity, like, in your programs, what would you regard as the full-time qualification and as a part-time qualification? For example, I would assume your 12 months learnership is the full-time qualification. What would be your part-time?
You mean part qualifications?
Yes.
Okay. So these are actually these are already registered by the QCTO as either full-time or part qualifications. So if you are looking at doing a full qualification, the training provider should be able to tell you whether or not it's registered as a full part. Another place where you can see whether or not it's a full qualification or part-time will be on your SACPA website. On top, it's got a whole list of title and type of qualification. By type of qualification, it will indicate if it's a full qualification, but it will only say occupational qualification. If it only says occupational qualification, then it's a full qualification. If it says part qualification, then it's part qualification. But in terms of duration, no, you also get part qualifications that actually run for 12 months or 13 months, depending on the credit value.
And full-time or part-time would depend, that's the delivery methodology, and it would depend on how the training provider is implementing that qualification. But keep in mind, if it's a learnership, again, there is a workplace exposure requirement.
Definitely.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, You're welcome, Yamkela. Okay, if we don't have any more questions, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Okay, Zola's got a question. Zola, do you have a question?
Yes, in fact, it's no longer a question. I wanted to say thank you very much for your briefing. Really, it just bring it to us a green light. You know, we were really in the dark. I so believe us to move forward, know where to go. But
absolutely.
Now, for me, that part of the learners were nice story, where the learners, was most of the learners that have been training in learnerships, they are disabled learners. And in such a case, maybe a learner will have a poor listening skills. So the learner will need what you call, in fact, I know in the assessment, there's no someone who's listening or reading or making any sound. It's you and your assessment tool. But in the case of a person who's partially blind, this is partially blind, now he's there now to write the ISA now. In that assessment center, are they going to be able to provide what you call a mentor, someone that will be assisting specially for that candidate? That was my concern. And other than that, I so believe that with your briefing was really very, very clear to me. I believe now I see where to from now. Otherwise, thank you very much, Sister.
Thank you, Zola. I know that I know for me a concern is neurodiversity, individuals living with neurodiversity, hearing impaired, visual impairment, and how we're going to overcome those specific obstacles. I mean, learnerships have been around for a very long time, so we've weathered our way through that in getting CETA approval for verbal questioning, etc. It definitely is a challenge, and I think it is something that would have been raised with the QCTO further. But maybe in my capacity with the ASDSA, it's something that we can look at is how we're going to accommodate individuals with disabilities.
Definitely.
Thank you. Absolutely. And then we have Kate.
curious because that's one of my areas of specialization is accessibility, accommodation, enablement. I particularly focus on digital accessibility, but I'm also aware of and involved with processes around how you make that feasible in exam or other contexts. So in terms of my ed tech background, and I'd be fascinated to chat to you more about that. Sorry, that was just a bit of
thank you.
Jump
Thank
in.
you. No, 100%, Kate, because you're the people the QCTO should be speaking to for accessibility and reasonable accommodation. So please do stay in touch. Let's see how we can possibly take this further, either through Ireland or in capacity of the ASDSA to approach the QCTO to understand better what their model is for accessibility.
I'd be delighted to chat to you. I've got other contacts who've got special interests and awareness of various elements. I work on an international level, so I'm fascinated by what the differences are within South Africa in terms of, and I know we're trying to get there, and there's little pockets of enthusiasm and activity, but I've worked with international education suppliers, so I'm very aware of how legislatively constructed it is in the US or Europe, or, there's a lot more power and affordance available for the individual.
Absolutely, but that means that you come with solutions also.
Yeah, and I'm neurodivergent, so that helps. I'm also the one who failed my exams and got really low grades.
Yeah.
So it's like
right there with you.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Kate, as long as you've got my contact details, please reach out so that I can reach out to you too, and we can continue that conversation.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Kate. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have stolen way too much of your time. Your questions and your contributions have been invaluable, and it only sets us up further for success in being able to continue to empower people to empower others. So thank you very much for participating. Wishing you a fantastic remainder of the week and a brilliant week further. And okay, I'm going to allow last one. Gugu, you've got a question? Oh, okay. So I think Gugu was clapping. Okay. All right. Brilliant. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Be safe and warm wherever you are. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Dali.
Bye.
Please don't forget me. I'm in PE. I need something to talk to you. I was doing one of your projects. I'm Zola Sibam.
Oh, hi, Zola.
Yes.
Okay, drop me an email.
I'm taking advantage of this opportunity. So,
okay, Zola.
Please do.
All right, no problem. Drop me an email.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.